Good evening and welcome to Face to Face, a new show where we talk with broadcasters of the past and present here in South Dakota. Today on my show, on my very first show, I have with me Brian Allen of KSFY. Thank you, Brian, for being with us today.
Anytime, glad to be here.
So just give us a quick profile of yourself.
Quick profile of myself. Well, I'm currently the morning and midday anchor at KSFY Television here in Sioux Falls, some producing duties in there as well. I was excited when I learned that I was going to come here to Lincoln High School and talk to you folks about broadcasting, because I was essentially the same age as you all when I started doing this. I was about 16 when I got my break in radio in Des Moines, and then it went from there, radio over to newspaper for a time.
As you just said, you started very young at 16. When did you know that you wanted to go into broadcasting and journalism?
For me, it's always been one of those things that's really been in the blood. Always had a desire to write and to help people learn about the world around them. What I'm always like to do is I like to tell the story of back in preschool or maybe in kindergarten. Remember when you'd play cops or firemen or whatever? Well, I was the guy that would follow them around with an imaginary microphone and ask them what was happening. Describe to me what's going on. And everyone says, oh, that story's not true. It's the honest truth. This is something that's been with me since I was young. I was brought up in a household where the news was watched regularly, where I was told it was important to know about the world around you. And that just stuck with me, as I grew up. And then when I decided, what I wanted to do, what my interests were, it just sort of, everything just kind of led into news.
When you were young, who were your role models in journalism?
Boy, role models. Role models for me, these names may not mean anything to the viewing audience because my role models were more local broadcasters at the time out of Des Moines. But Russ Van Dyke, Paul Rhodes, Mike Keene, John Bachman, those were my role models because they seemed to so solidly believe what they were saying, as far as their presentation of the news. You automatically, at first blush, believed what they told you. And that's a powerful thing. And, when you're a newscaster and people watch you regularly and they trust you, developing that trust takes a lot of work. And no broadcaster can ever take that for granted, the public's trust in you. That's something that's sacred. It's something that has to be worked at.
What kind of education did you have growing up? In fact, when did it start? Did it start in high school or in college?
Working in broadcasting? Mm-hmm. Started when I was in high school, actually. I was fortunate enough, I went to Valley High School in West Des Moines. And it had its own radio station. That's where I got my very first beginnings, DJing a 2-hour music show about 2 times a week. And I did that literally for probably 2 months before I got hired professionally in Des Moines. And that opportunity came about, as you talk to more people in broadcasting, you're going to find out that the weirdest things, lead people, to their first professional break. I was working as a grocery stocker in Des Moines, and the company that I worked for wanted to produce a radio commercial. And they were trying to decide, well, we'd like one of our employees to do it, that lends more credibility if one of your own says this is a good place, come work here, or whatever. Well, they knew that I worked in high school radio, so they said, why don't you do it? So I said, fine. So I went down to one of the radio stations in Des Moines, recorded the commercial, they liked my voice down there, and that's what led to them hiring me part-time, in real broadcasting. It was that break of recording a radio commercial for a grocery store, that really gave me my big break and, is responsible for where I am today. It's just odd when you look back over your career, the little nuances and the little strange things that help you get, to where you are.
Your foot in the door.
Right.
When you were a radio broadcaster, you said you hosted a music show. Mm-hmm. Were you just like a regular DJ, or did you also do news and sports over the radio?
My very first job at KLYF in Des Moines, it was just strictly music. But as I said, my real love this entire time has been news. Well, it turns out that KLYF had a AM sister station, WHO Radio, and they did a lot of news, a lot of sports, a lot of weather, a lot of traffic. And so while I was appreciative of the job at KLYF, almost from day one, I was thinking about what can I do to get my foot in the door at WHO? Because if you got to work at WHO, you got to do news. And so that's where my real passion lie.
Now, From working with you for a while, I know that you went to college, but you weren't there for too long. What exactly, what was your college education, and why did you leave so early?
I completed freshman and sophomore year of college, and the first semester of my junior year, KCAU Television out of Sioux City called. And the news director there at that time I'd worked with at WHO Radio and Television. He had a reporter opening, wanted someone competent that he could trust, that he could turn loose without a lot of training. And my name was the first to pop up into his head, you know, having previously worked together. And he said, I know you're halfway through college, but I've got this job, and if you want it, it's yours. And it's one of those things where you really have to sit down and you have to debate, do I want to continue learning it from strictly a classroom standpoint, or do I want to get out into the field and do it? And everyone that's faced with that question, you know, will ultimately come to their own answer that works for them. By the time this opportunity came around, you know, my junior year in college, I'd already been working in radio and television for about 4 years. And the classes that I was taking, you know, at college, focused on information that I'd already learned from my professional experience.
So you were bored, basically?
Yeah, you know, you hate to say it, but yeah, you know, it was somewhat boring. You know, you're sitting there and you're learning about, this is how you turn the microphone on. You know, well, I've been doing that for 4 years already. So what it boiled down to for me was I wanted the opportunity to get out and do it, to expand, you know, learn as you go, so to speak. And in a smaller television market like Sioux City, that's one of its saving graces. You know, the pay may not be what you want it to be, but you're allowed the opportunity to learn as you go and make your mistakes and learn from them. So when you jump to your next job, you're more refined, you've got more of the basics down, and then you can start to lay the groundwork for anything, improving your writing, improving your presentation, improving the way you develop stories and put them together. It's all a gradual learning process.
Do you think it was a wise decision for you to just do the 2 years of college and then leave and not complete all 4 years?
For me, yeah, I really do. You know, when I look over, you know, just what I accomplished at KCAU, I started out as a reporter, then I became a weekend weather anchor, then to a weekend news anchor, and when I left, I was anchoring Monday and Friday 6 and 10 newscasts, and I was doing that at 24. Which is almost unheard of in this business. A Monday, Friday main anchor at 24. Not that you wear that on your sleeve and say, oh, isn't it cool, you know, I'm 24 and I'm the main anchor. But it just, when you look back on it, to some extent you feel a sense of pride that your hard work paid off and was recognized.
What's the difference between radio, you know, broadcasting and journalism next to TV? What's the big difference there?
A lot of people ask me about that. Why did you choose television over radio? What's the difference? What makes one better than another? And, you know, as someone that has worked in both and loves both and respects both, I really don't see one necessarily being better than the other. What draws me to television, to break it down to its general principle, in television you can show and tell. You know, you can show the action. You know, if you're doing a story about some type of house fire, let's say, you can show the fire, or you can show the aftermath of the fire. With radio, you can just say there was a fire this morning. You know, but if you have the pictures added to that, it in some respects takes the viewer there. Oh, that's what the fire looked like. Oh, that's what all the damage looked like. You know, it's somewhat a basic difference, but enough to draw me to it and to, you know, for me to, you know, for it to be my life's work.
So you were in Sioux City for a while, and then you came up here to Sioux Falls. Is there a big difference when you came up here to Sioux Falls?
You mean from station to station?
Yeah, station to station. And I guess also in the different fields. As you said, you went from, you did weather and then you went to news. I mean, you know, what's the change like?
You know, really there wasn't much of a change for me per se. You know, sure, weather, you know, doing the weather is different from presenting the news. But the way I looked at both is you're informing the public. People have to know what's going on in the world around them. You know, that's the news angle. People have to know what it's doing weather-wise. You know, on the most basic of circumstances for weather, do I wear a coat or don't I? On the most serious of circumstances, where's the storm? Is there a tornado? I looked at both as just having a general sense of duty in informing the public. As far as station differential, coming up here to KSFY, while I had a good experience at KCAU, I valued coming up here to KSFY, just because of the fact I mentioned that when you're in those smaller markets, you can make those mistakes. But after a while, when you work in those smaller markets and you start to get a little more refined and you still find yourself working with folks that are just getting, you know, their foot in the door, you want to go to a more experienced newsroom, because you can bring something to that newsroom, but you can also learn a lot from folks that have been doing it, in some cases, you know, longer than you have. What I like to tell folks is, if you're working in this business and the day ever arises where you think that you know it all and you figured it all out, that's the day you should get out the door, because you can always learn something new. You know, there's always room for improvement.
What's some of the changes that you've seen throughout the years of being in broadcasting?
Technology. You know, one word, technology. Digital technology, you know, just how it's improved the clarity of video that you shoot with camera, how it makes editing the video a lot easier. Just technology, and it's not going to stop. You know, that's the exciting thing about television and technology. Just all the improvements that will not only improve the product that you produce, but will also, you know, improve the way you produce it.
So, you've been in broadcasting now for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
What's the atmosphere like in the newsroom?
Just depends. What's ideal, or what I think is ideal for an atmosphere in a newsroom, is obviously when you hit the door, you're serious, because we have a serious job. You know, for me, broadcast journalism is a very serious profession. You know, we get to find out what's going on and then tell others, you know, because, you know, single parent families or whatever, you know, you're working one job, you're working two jobs, you don't always have the time to independently on your own find out what's going on in your community. That's our job, and that's a job that I take seriously. You know, having said that, general newsroom atmosphere for the most part is somewhat light. You like it to be somewhat humorous because this is a stressful job. All that changes, though, an hour before airtime. That final critical 60 minutes when you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. Are all your scripts written? Are all the pieces of video that you need cut? Does production need anything from you? You know, are your reporters where they should be? All that. But again, you should always have an undercurrent, I think, of just good-naturedness, because the stressful times come and go so fast that you need something to somewhat buffer that.
Right. Well, we asked a few kids some questions. You know, what would they ask you if they could?
Sure.
We got a lot of stuff, just, you know, best and worst things. What's been one of the most interesting stories you've ever had to cover?
I think the most interesting story I've ever had to cover happened in 1993 in Des Moines, when we had day after day after day of nonstop rain, and the entire state flooded. Every river came out of its banks, every creek came out of its banks. If it had water in it normally, it was overflowing. And what happened is there are two main rivers that flow into Des Moines, the Des Moines River and the Raccoon River. And both of them flooded, essentially cutting off the town. The floodwaters invaded the waterworks system, so there wasn't any drinking water. It invaded the power plant, no power for downtown. Everything at the station was on emergency generator. And it's just something, you lose yourself in it, covering the story. But when you step back and you realize, this is my hometown. There are people here that I care about, and they don't have drinking water, and they don't have power. And just that feeling of realizing that events were happening around you that you had absolutely no control over, that is exciting and at the same time terrifying. Because what's going to happen next? When's the rain going to stop? You know, I mean, that's I think is the biggest story and the most important story I've ever covered, because it's those type of situations where lives are on the line and where you can pass on information. Here's where you can get clean drinking water. You know, if you have at-home medical equipment, here's where you can go as a shelter until the power comes back on. That was a story that affected a lot of people, but also affected me personally. And its impact was just incredible.
Who's been the biggest person you've ever interviewed?
Well, let's see. I interviewed President Clinton when he was running for president, first time around, back in 1991, 1992. Most recently, about a year ago, I had to sit down with Governor Ventura over in Minnesota, who's just a fascinating guy. I'd say it's probably more Governor Ventura than President Clinton, just for the reason that I got to spend more time with Governor Ventura, asking him questions, trying to figure out what type of guy he is, what type of governor he is, what type of politician he sees himself to be. I think I'll leave it at Governor Ventura for right now. He's a very interesting man.
You said you anchored the 6 and 10 down in Des Moines. You did
down in Sioux City.
Down in Sioux City.
Mm-hmm.
You did weekends for a while at KSFY, and now you're doing the morning show.
Mm-hmm.
So what's been the weirdest story that you've had to look directly into the camera and say line by line, and in your mind you're thinking, my goodness, what happened here?
Let's see. Weirdest story. I'm trying to think of one, Avi, and it's just not coming to me right now. There are a lot of times as an anchor where you get caught off guard. Either you haven't had time to pre-read your scripts, or there's a miscommunication between yourself and a member of the floor crew, and you look at the wrong camera, and then you have to recover from that. And those moments are somewhat awkward, but they happen. And I think the viewing audience realizes that. You can't be perfect. Those little bumps are going to happen with live television.
Well, perfect. What's this one we got a lot of. What's the stupidest thing you've ever said on camera?
Well, the one that comes to mind happened yesterday in the morning show. We had a cooking segment, and I talk about lines that you say, and then you realize you're just a moron, and you wish you could take them back. We have a chef in, and she dips a piece of veal in some breading, and then puts it on the oven. And we taste it, and I say, wow, this really has kind of a breadish taste to it. And I said, I wonder if that's because of the, and then you realize where it's going. I was like, well, I wonder if that's because of the breading, that it has a breadish taste. And you just think to yourself, that was terribly smooth, Mr. Allen. But that's just one, that's just one recently.
Now, do you try to recover from that, or do you just...
There was no way out of that one.
Do you just, pass it and just hopefully no one really noticed?
Oh, you just... On that one, I just tried to laugh at myself, because in a situation like that, where you just get caught like that, the only thing you can do is laugh about it.
There was an interesting one we had a lot of. Because the business has changed, and the fact that it's kind of... News has become more... shocking and more realistic, and they're going more towards the, the shock value and all that. Do you think that news at the moment, local news, is headed more down the wrong path or down the right path with, the type of stories they're going for?
Well, I'd like to think that local news is headed down the right path. I find it interesting that you say news appears to be more shocking, or at least heading in that direction. I would reserve that for news magazines and entertainment shows rather than newscasts. And I think that's a fine line that folks need to realize, that there's a delineation between the two. If you have television shows, for example, like Inside Edition, Real TV, or whatever, that somewhat try to pass themselves off as pseudo-news programs, I think that they tend to trend more towards the shock TV or the tabloid television. News, I think, is resisting the sway in that direction.
Do you see it happen every once in a while, or?
No, I really haven't. I really haven't. But I'm biased, or maybe I'm naive about the whole thing. But what I see, at least at KSFY, I don't see us trending towards any type of shock value news. When we're in the middle of story selection, we ask ourselves a couple of questions. What impact does this story have on you and me? What will this do to the community or a town per se? When you boil it down, if news is going to be interesting, it has to focus on people and how it affects people. and it has to be presented from that direction. It has to be written from that angle. Not that you sacrifice interesting news writing, but it has to have an impact. And our job as journalists is to explain that impact to the viewer in a non-biased fashion. You know, this could happen, this could not happen. This may be the result, this may not be the result. Presenting both sides, but it has to have viewer impact.
I found this quote, it's by anonymous, but I did find it. It said that you know a reporter has done a very good story when both sides of the story want to kill the reporter. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree with that, and here's why. When you tell a story, you know, obviously that involves two sides. Each side, when you talk to them, presents an obvious bias when they speak to you because they believe so strongly in what they're talking about. A reporter's job is to bypass that passion that they feel and boil it down to the facts. I remember one time, and this has happened to a lot of reporters, but election coverage one year down in Sioux City. I was working a specific, I think it was a ballot issue or a referendum or something. And I got calls on it, and one of them said that I was treating the story, I was tilting it towards Democrats. And I got another call that said I was trending it towards Republicans. I agree with that quote. You've got to cut through the passion and the bias of the person you're talking to and boil it down to just the facts. Because in the end, that's what matters. You know, what are the facts of this story?
Besides the stories that you know, news, the local and national news cover, there's also stories about the people who are covering it. Now, one question we got quite a few times was, have you or anyone that you've known had plastic surgery because they're going to be on television a lot?
I haven't, but I probably should. I've got one of those faces made for radio. Personally, no, I haven't. Have I known anyone that has undergone? I've always had speculation about, I'm not going to name any names, but a person that I worked with a couple years ago, nobody up here. But yeah, I always wondered. I mean, it's, I don't want to say.
Do you think it happens a lot?
Well, I don't want to say that it's common, but it happens. You know, and quite frankly, this is a business where looks matter. You know, to some extent. It shouldn't be the overriding value of a journalist. That shouldn't be what they're based on. You know, but I think it plays a role. And I think for some people that if they're that truly dissatisfied with their appearance, that that's an option for them.
Well, we've got a few minutes left here. Some more questions that we got here. I guess we'll round out with them. But if you weren't an anchor, what would you be today? If you weren't in this business, what would you be?
If I wasn't in this business, what would I be? You know, the first answer that comes to mind is miserable, you know, because I love doing this so much. But as far as another career, well, that's an interesting question, Avi. I don't know. I really don't know. You've got me stumped because this is something that I've worked towards for so long. You know, and have had a passion for so long. I really never considered anything else.
What's your one goal to be? Before you retire from this business, what's one goal that you want?
Well, I think I'm going to be one of those guys that's not going to retire. I think I'll be doing this at some point until I drop in some type of capacity. The goal is to always be seen by the public as being trustworthy and honest. Because if you don't have that, none of the rest of it matters. You know, the basic keys to success for a journalist: does the public trust you? And does the public think that you're telling them the truth? And if the public ever says no on either of those, you're in trouble. Because if they don't trust you, and if they think that you're not telling them the truth, why should they watch?
Good point, good point. How much experience do you think, you know, people who are going into this business, how much do they need? How much experience?
Well, that's kind of a tough question because, you know, where do you start? you know, experience.
Well, that and we also got the question, you know, what's a good way to break into this business?
Call radio stations, call TV stations, explain the situation. You know, I never thought that I'd be hired by a 100,000 watt FM radio station at 16, but I was. You know, a lot of it's being there at the right place at the right time. A lot of it is showing initiative. You know, I want to do this. I know a lot of people that started doing this and they didn't get paid anything just to get the experience. What I would like to see more of is, I'm seeing more and more as the years go by, at least people going into television, that they've just studied television in college, then they've transferred across to a TV station. I'd like to see folks get more of a background in radio, in print. You know, when I worked in radio, it taught me how to use my voice. When I worked in print, it sharpened my writing skills. And those married together well when I went to television. I didn't have to learn it from the ground up when I started in TV, because I'd already had that experience previous, and it served me well.
I guess this is just something that everyone who's ever watched news wants to know. What's it like to be an anchor, to be, you know, the news guy? Is it hard? I mean, do you get recognized in public a lot?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I first started out in the business and would get recognized, that would be somewhat disconcerting, because people are saying, "Hi, Brian," they're stopping you, they're talking to you, and you have no idea who they are. But after a while, you realize that you might not know who they are, but they have a general sense of who you are. They welcome you into their homes nightly. They feel like they know you. And once you realize that, then it takes on a whole new meaning. Is it hard to be the news anchor? Sometimes. Is it fun to be the news anchor? A lot of the time, yeah, it is. I always go into it with a deep sense of professionalism. I hate making mistakes. You ask anyone I work with, I do not like to make mistakes. And while you can never achieve perfection, it's impossible to achieve perfection, but you know what? You try. Every time you get out there, you try. Otherwise, why are you doing it? If you're not going into it with the thought that this is going to be good and I'm going to try my best, why are you doing it?
Well, we got a few seconds left here. I want to thank you again for coming today.
No problem. My pleasure.
Is there, you know, anything else you want to tell everyone who's watching tonight?
Just folks that are interested in getting into the broadcasting business, don't let your age dissuade you from trying. If you have an idea that this is what you want to do it.
All right. I thank you again, Mr. Brian Allen. Brian Allen of KSFY joined us today on Face to Face. And I thank you for watching us today. Please join us next time for another edition of Face to Face. I'm Avi Forstein. Good night.